Well, good evening and welcome to our Friday night Bible study. And I see my wife would like to join, so let's get her up on speaker here and let her put her phone away. Are you ready? Not quite. Are you ready now? Didn't hear you.
Oh,
Okay.
well,
Yeah.
I don't know.
I was waiting for you to get done putting your phone away, and I was asking if you were ready, so I'd know you'd have it put away before I set it down in front of the mic. And then I set it down in front of the mic because I thought you were ready, and then you put your phone away.
Huh?
It makes an awful noise when you slide it back into the pocket. And I try to hold the phone away from the mic until you get that done.
I didn't hear anything.
Well, I know you don't, but we do. Anyway,
I just learned a new way to irritate you.
yeah. Anyway, this is for Friday, June 20th. It is the fourth week since the last time we did a sermon presentation, so we do have a sermon presentation prepared. I haven't looked at it yet since I prepared it earlier in the week. I'll have to sit down and proof it again tonight. I don't catch all the errors even in 2 or 3 proofings, but we do have it ready. So we will, Lord willing, and there aren't other problems, present that on the group live tomorrow at 11 Central Time. So that you'll know when to join us if that's what you wish to do.
Send the cat.
What's that?
Send the cat in here.
I don't think she wants to. She looks pretty content in here on the floor.
Okay. I got a wet bottle she can lick.
Uh,
Yeah.
you may not have noticed this, but cats seem particularly attracted to the moisture that condenses on the outside of a cold bottle. We first encountered that and we kind of thought something was wrong, and in fact it may have been. But we had brought in, I think it was a paper soft drink cup with ice in the drink, and we'd set it down on the living room floor shortly after we had moved to this place. And at least one of the cats came in and started licking at it like she had just crossed the desert and needed whatever water she could find. And she was very, very intent about it. And we concluded that they weren't used to the water where we had moved, and they weren't drinking their water, and that's why she was that thirsty. That may have been part of it. But we found since then other cats do like to lick that cold bottle to get that cold condensation. Something about it they find very attractive. But she's got her paw over her eyes right now, so I don't.
You gave her distilled water.
Yeah, we did give them distilled water for a time until they adjusted to the city water that came out of the tap. Anyway, the big news, particularly in this house, but to some extent even nationwide, the story has made most of the national media, and that is that Karen Reed in Canton, Massachusetts, well actually the courthouse is in Dedham, Massachusetts, was found not guilty of killing her boyfriend, Boston police officer John O'Keefe. This was the second trial, and the trial was done very differently. The state brought in an attorney noted for having defended Whitey Bulger in his trials, and that attorney was so used to being a defense attorney that he prosecuted the case much like he was a defense attorney. And that may in part have been his undoing, because he kept acting like as if all he had to do was to establish reasonable doubt about what the defense witnesses were saying, and in the process, he created reasonable doubt about his own experts and witnesses, and so the jury acquitted the defendant Karen Reed on all the counts except for one lesser included count of operating under the influence. They believed that they had her admission that she had drunk and then driven, although the defense didn't really defend that matter, and I don't think it was their strategy to do so. And when the verdict came down, the judge talked like she was going to bring them back in next week for sentencing, and it sounded to me like the defense asked if she could be sentenced right away. The judge... What?
That was Brennan that said that. He said he wants her sentenced right now.
Oh, he did say that.
He did.
And, well, then when the judge asked him for his recommendation, he recommended a year of probation, which is the standard sentence handed out for first-time OUI convicts in Massachusetts. And that's what the judge issued. So this may go down in history as the most expensive drunk driving conviction in the history of the nation. The Commonwealth spent somewhere a little bit less than $500,000 on one set of experts, one of whom had to admit on the stand that he had lied about his qualifications. And the defense was able to elicit testimony that one of the experts they brought in, essentially the experts to counter the Commonwealth's experts, was paid $50,000 for their work on preparing their testimony. So,
And then
but still, oh yeah.
by an expert that showed the other expert had cheated in order to get the results he got.
Yeah. Well, yeah, there's a lot of discussion about all the evidence that was presented, but some of the jurors have been questioned by the media since then, and some of them have said they believed she was factually innocent. She didn't do it. It was almost like, and one lawyer that we listened to on this actually said it's like the defense in this case is running a prosecution, and the prosecution in the case is operating a defense. Like we said, the lawyer in charge was a defense attorney, and he got paid what?
One juror has said that the judge needs to be investigated.
I didn't hear that one, but I've heard a lot of people saying that the judge needs to be investigated. So
I did hear that.
Well, it has, a lot of people looked at that, and some attorneys have looked at what was going on in that and felt like the judge was acting in a biased manner, and it looked that way. Now, I have my own potential theory for that. I don't know. You can't get inside someone's head. This was a high-profile case. This was a police officer found dead on the front lawn of a former Boston police officer after a party attended by other Boston police officers, an ATF agent, I believe some Canton police officers, a Canton selectman. A lot of people were there. So there were a lot of people that wanted to protect themselves by deflecting blame from the people inside the house. And I wonder if maybe both the elected prosecutor who never showed up in the courtroom, the elected prosecutor and the judge acted as unprofessionally and as biased as they acted, so that when the acquittal came through, they would be absolved of involvement. Like, it's like the judge saying, I had my thumb on the scale and they still acquitted her. So don't blame me. I don't
And
know.
people are now demanding that the DA resign.
Well, it does sound like he may not get elected at the next,
Yeah.
even if they have to elect a Republican. That's, this is suburban Boston. It's heavily Democratic, but, they might elect a Republican just to keep this guy from continuing in office. Who knows? So the moment was so emotional that my wife even cried, and she cried again the next day as she listened to people talking about it. So we
No one.
we in this house believe that justice was done in this case for the defendant. Not
Now listen,
what
when her dad was interviewed, he gave the glory to God that she had been found innocent.
okay.
And you know what?
What?
He's Catholic.
Yeah. Well, and
But it does not mean you don't have a relationship with God.
no.
Being Catholic does not make you an evil person.
Yeah. Contrary to how some of us were raised.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, that was kind of big news in this house this week, and kind of a big deal. Unfortunately, justice for the deceased may never take place, or for the family of the deceased.
Well, it's not over yet.
Well, they have filed. You may remember years ago the O.J. Simpson trial when he was accused of murdering his girlfriend and some guy that was with his girlfriend when he showed up. And he was able to get acquitted on the murder charge in court. But then the families of the deceased filed a wrongful death lawsuit against him and won in that court. So the deceased family has filed a lawsuit against the defendant, Karen Reed, and it would have started already, but the judge in the case said, no, I'm not going to let it go on because discovery in this case would end up in the hands of the Commonwealth and would prejudice the defendant in her criminal trial. So this will probably go ahead now that the criminal trial is over and she's been acquitted. It's also likely that they'll get a different judge in the civil case, and the judge won't have the bias against the defense that this judge seemed to. They may not get anything. Some commenter posted, the family said that the deceased was upset that Karen Reed was spending too much money on his niece and nephew. The deceased is John O'Keefe, Boston police officer. His sister had died sometime ahead of him, and at some point his brother-in-law, his sister's husband, also died, and so the children were left without parents, orphans. And John agreed to take them in, and his girlfriend, Karen, was helping take care of these two children. They're preteens now, something like that?
Oh, I think one of them's 19.
Yeah. Anyway, they're not quite adult yet, but they're still. Anyway, the commenter was saying that John was upset that Karen was spending too much money on the niece and nephew, and now the family is going to reward her for that by wanting more money out of her. Well, they can't get any. She spent all her money, sold all her assets, depleted her retirement accounts in order to pay for her defense in the criminal trial. So there isn't, the saying in the legal world is you can't get blood out of a turnip.
we raised worldwide. We raised $1 million to help pay for her defense.
And
She had $4 or $5 million in debt.
yeah, yeah. The point is, you can't get blood out of a turnip. They can get a judgment. What's that going to do? They can't get the money, probably, and they may not get a judgment because although the standard of evidence is preponderance of the evidence rather than beyond a reasonable doubt, as is the case in a criminal case, still they might find it hard in an even-handed, truly fair courtroom making a case that Karen Reed had anything to do with the death of her boyfriend. So,
But that's not the only thing that happened.
well, yeah, I was going to mention, because we were talking about the deaths of these two children's parents. The prosecutor, the special prosecutor in the case, at some point during the case, during the trial, let out in open court that the father had died of an overdose on his wife's grave. Information that the children did not know until he blabbed it. And a lot of people thought that was a really dirty, slimy, snaky move on the part of that special prosecutor. Recall, he defended Whitey Bulger, the noted Boston area, I don't know, crime boss. Anyway, we don't know what happened. We can't say for sure that what the Commonwealth said did or didn't happen, but the evidence sure strongly suggests that it couldn't have happened the way the Commonwealth said. And furthermore, every time new evidence came forward, the Commonwealth just changed its theory of what had happened. So,
May I speak?
yeah.
I was saying it's not over yet because the reporter that brought this all out into the open, where the public would know what's going on, got jailed. And he's fighting all kinds of ridiculous charges of witness intimidation.
Right. Well, no, that part's not over. I think he had initially something like 16 charges, and now it's down to 10. They managed to get 6 of them thrown out.
Yeah.
But it's still, if he gets sentenced to the max on 10 counts of this stuff, he could go to jail for life. And we've seen video of one of the one of the more prominent of those confrontations where he's accused of intimidating witnesses. And essentially he was just asking them, are you going to tell the truth? And they found it intimidating because, at least from our perspective, they intended to go into court and lie. And a lot of experts who have looked at the testimony have agreed that some of the witnesses did in fact lie on the stand. Well, of course, we know that happens all the time, but people raise their hand, swear an oath on the Bible, whatever. It doesn't mean anything. They swear they're going to tell the truth, and then they tell the lies they intended to tell. And in some cases, it's because they've got the saying is a dog in the fight. They've got an interest in what's going on. And the human tendency to, the malleability of human memory and our tendency to self-justify may lead us to sit down in court and tell blatant lies because we've convinced ourselves that those things are the truth. And when somebody else gets up and testifies to the contrary, some of the less well-adjusted people will blurt out in court, "They're lying, they're perjuring themselves, Your Honor." And the judge usually tells them to be quiet. It's not their time to talk. But, that's just That's human nature. We're messed up and broken. Well, enough about that. Like I say, we weren't there. We didn't see what happened that early in those early morning hours. The Commonwealth said it happened at about 12:30 in the morning. Um, so we can't say for certain what did or didn't happen, but the evidence that we saw convinced us that she didn't have anything to do with his death, or somebody else did. So,
Well, what got me is that he was still alive when they found him at, I don't remember, 5 or 6 a.m.
it was just after 6 a.m., as I recall.
The doctor said that his type of injury was a fatal wound and he would have died in about 15 to 20 minutes from the time he got injured.
Yeah, I'm not sure I believe that, but that was a pretty qualified witness.
Yeah,
So,
and yet they claim that the accident was,
at 12:30, and they found him alive laying in the lawn at 6 a.m. Yeah.
yeah, dying.
Yeah.
And Karen Reed, was the only one. We saw the video. She was the only one there who was trying to help him until the paramedics came.
Well, the witnesses testified that they were helping her do CPR on him, but
Yeah, well, they were. One was talking on the phone, and one was yelling at her.
yeah, these were witnesses we're pretty certain were lying on the stand, so they may have said they were helping her to make themselves look good, not because they were telling the truth in court. So,
And the one actually admitted that she lied.
well, there were several witnesses that, under cross-examination, admitted that they had lied.
Yeah, most of them. Well, I think all of them did.
Well, yeah, and then there was the
I don't think McCabe did, Jim McCabe, but
there was the Canton police officer, who's now a Boston police officer, who was called actually by the defense, but treated by the defense as a hostile witness. And they brought her in because she had initially testified that she saw two people, a police officer, I think, and the ATF agent, wasn't it?
it was Higgins and
The current police chief in Canton, wasn't it?
I can't remember his name.
Yeah.
Higgins' boss.
That
No,
they were in,
yeah.
that was in the Canton Sallyport after Karen Reed's vehicle had been brought in, and they were in there for quite some time. And this is important because after the car got to the Canton Police Sallyport, state police officers swept the yard where John O'Keefe's body was found and found bits of tail light that matched Karen's vehicle. And that was the Commonwealth's primary evidence that she had done it. Was we found her tail light in the yard, but they didn't find any until after the car had made it to the Sallyport. And she had testified, what was it, maybe in the grand jury proceedings, that she had seen these two in the Sallyport for an extent of time. And then she got called on the carpet. The next thing you know, she calls, it was somebody, it was the FBI, wasn't it?
She was concerned enough about what she saw that she called the FBI. And they didn't keep it confidential. It got out that she had done that, and
next thing you know, she's going to the FBI and telling them she had a false memory. And she testified in court that it was a false memory.
she got transferred to a different place, and she got called into the police commissioner's office where she worked, and told, given a sizable raise, and told, do the right thing. And when she came out, she was also presented with the timeline, which came from Jennifer McCabe, which was false.
Well, the timeline that she was talking about was the timeline of when the car went into Sallyport, and she then testified that she had left work a couple of hours before the thing arrived, so therefore her memory had to be a false memory. Although,
it didn't fit the timeline. It didn't fit with the timeline, therefore she had a false memory.
Right.
And she refused to back down, and she was pretty hostile.
But apparently the jury didn't believe her. This false memory thing didn't convince them. What was that?
And dumb, and scared out of her wits.
Well, she even said on the stand, my whole job depends on my testimony in this case. Didn't she?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I was intending to cut this off 10 minutes ago, and we natted on and on about it. I wanted to quit.
Quit talking about it.
What?
You told me to quit talking about it. I wasn't going to bring it up.
Well, yeah. Anyway. Like I say, we wasted some time on that. We had to quit early last week, so we're going to back up a little bit when we get into 2 Kings, so we can pick up the story that we were in the middle of when we abruptly ended last week. So let's bow our heads and then we'll get going into our study tonight. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for your blessings, and we thank you that we have an opportunity to be witnesses to your goodness and mercy. And we want to reflect that goodness, that mercy, that love in our lives as we relate to the people around us. Send your Holy Spirit as we study the written word tonight to help us see, internalize, and reflect your wonderful character in our own lives. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
Bukaki.
Well, was that who it was?
Yeah.
That was the state police sergeant. His actual name is Buchanan, but one of the witnesses slipped and called him Bukaki on the stand, and so that's kind of become how people refer to him.
She picked that up by listening to Turtle Boy.
Maybe so. There are a lot of little things that kind of became memes of a sort in this case. For example,
almost the very beginning, and it was scary. And when she came out of that courtroom yesterday, when they pronounced not guilty for the last charge, is when the crowd out there were thousands of people outside the courthouse, and when that gotten word that she was not guilty, you could hear the crowd inside.
You could, yes.
Yeah.
Anyway, one of the little factoids that became kind of a meme in the case was a Google search that was done at 2:27 a.m. So this is sometime, well, there were arguments about when the search actually took place, and the witnesses actually testified that Karen had asked them to ask the question at 6, which doesn't make sense if the phone said it happened at 2:27.
She did it twice.
Whatever. The initial query on Google was how long to die in cold. But she misspelled the first word, which is not surprising because you're using a little tiny QWERTY keyboard that shows up on the screen of your phone, and you're fat fingering these little bitty tiles trying to type in letters, and the letter right under W is S. And she missed the W and hit the S and submitted the query with an S instead of a W. So it came out, "Hos long to die in cold." And that became kind of a little inside joke among Karen's supporters. "Hos long for justice," that kind of thing. And we saw a video a couple of nights ago, I think. Somebody put up Auntie Bev's, the judge was Beverly Cannoni, and people started calling her Auntie Bev. Auntie Bev's sidebar and grill. And they say that because these people do have Boston accents, so the R comes out kind of ah instead of like other people might say R inflected vowels. And there were a lot of times when the attorneys and the judge conferred out of the hearing of the jury in what's called a sidebar. So the judge would say, "I'll see the attorneys in sidebar." So, and there was, I noticed there was a sign on the door, HOSDY, instead of HOWDY. So, well.
There was a reporter, a court TV reporter, I think his name's DePetro.
Yeah.
He has been very loudly proclaiming there's no way you can break a tail light just by tapping another vehicle. And this week he got caught by somebody's dash cam and confronted because the person was sitting in the car. He accidentally bumped into somebody's car and shattered their taillight. He stopped, picked up the pieces to get rid of the evidence, and then walked away unreported. He did a hit and run.
Yeah.
And the woman that caught it on video got out and confronted him, and he just kind of blew her off. We need to quit.
Yeah. Well, in our story, we had read some of this we got through last week. I think some of it we got through week before last. The story of Jehu, who got anointed to be king by a servant of Elisha, and who then went to Jezreel and killed both Joram, the king of Israel, and Ahaziah, the king of Judah, who was visiting because they were related by marriage, as we're going to see soon. So there is a clear point in time where Israel and Judah can be linked together in the history of their kings, because both these kings died essentially on the same day at the hands of this one man Jehu. So now we're continuing the story of Jehu. And like I said, we were in this part of the story last week when we quit kind of suddenly. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to pick up at the beginning of the story. Now you'll notice that this version has put a subtitle at the top there saying Jehu kills the priests of Baal. I think that's a disservice, because the way the author prepared this narrative, he doesn't let on what's about to happen until it happens. So he keeps the suspense in place, and this subtitle ruins that. But anyway, let's go ahead and read it. Then Jehu called a meeting of all the people of the city and said to them, Ahab's worship of Baal was nothing to the way I will worship him. Therefore summon all the prophets and worshippers of Baal, and call together all his priests. See to it that every one of them comes, for I am going to offer a great sacrifice to Baal. Anyone who fails to come will be put to death. But Jehu's cunning plan was to destroy all the worshippers of Baal. Now, at this point, now the author has kind of let the cat out of the bag and presaged what's going to happen. Then Jehu ordered, "Prepare a solemn assembly to worship Baal." So they did. He sent messengers throughout all Israel, summoning those who worship Baal. They all came, not a single one remained behind, and they filled the temple of Baal from one end to the other. And Jehu instructed the keeper of the wardrobe, "Be sure that every worshiper of Baal wears one of these robes." So robes were given to them. Then Jehu went into the temple of Baal with Jehonadab, son of Rechab. Jehu said to the worshippers of Baal, "Make sure no one who worships the Lord is here, only those who worship Baal." Now, this is interesting. We render the Tetragrammaton, as you see here near the top of the screen, all caps Lord, Lord, to simulate the all capital, all consonant name of God. We transliterate it in English as YHWH, or Yahweh, and we give it Lord. Well, the meaning of Baal is Lord. So we're using the same technical name for the Creator as is being used for this false god. But enough of my rant about that. It's what we do, so it's what we do. We make the point that it's not important what syllables you pronounce as the name of the Creator. It's important what character you believe about the Creator, because the name represents the character in the Bible. And when we see all this important stuff about God's name, it's not about the letters or the syllables or what we say. It's about the character. That's what's important. So, anyway, reading on verse 24. So they were all inside the temple to offer sacrifices and burnt offerings. Now Jehu had stationed 80 of his men outside the building and had warned them, "If you let anyone escape, you will pay for it with your own life." As soon as Jehu had finished sacrificing the burnt offering, he commanded his guards and officers, "Go in and kill all of them. Don't let a single one escape." So they killed them all with their swords, and the guards and officers dragged their bodies outside. Then Jehu's men went into the innermost fortress, the temple of Baal. They dragged out the sacred pillar used in the worship of Baal and burned it. They smashed the sacred pillar and wrecked the temple of Baal, converting it into a public toilet, as it remains to this day. So he was really doing a lot to desecrate it. There's 3 footnotes there, B, C, and D. And they left their bodies lying there, and they threw them out into the outermost court. And then for C, the Hebrew reads city, and then for D, as in the Greek and Syriac versions and the Latin Vulgate, the Hebrew reads sacred pillars. So that's what they're saying. In this way, Jehu destroyed every trace of Baal worship from Israel. He did not, however, destroy the gold calves at Bethel and Dan, with which Jeroboam, son of Nebat, had caused Israel to sin. Nonetheless, the Lord said to Jehu, "You have done well in following my instructions to destroy the family of Ahab. Therefore your descendants will be kings of Israel down to the 4th generation." I'm going to suggest that this is not actually a quote from the Creator. It's just a quote that the writers have attributed to him because of the way they believe things took place in their world. But Jehu did not obey the law of the Lord, the God of Israel, with all his heart. He refused to turn from the sins that Jeroboam had led Israel to commit. At about that time, the Lord began to cut down the size of Israel's territory. King Hazael, remember, he was, in a sense, anointed by Elisha to be king of Aram, or what we would today call Syria. in Damascus, and he then suffocated Ben-Hadad, causing his death, and then he took over as king in Ben-Hadad's place. So now King Hazael has again attacked Israel, conquered several sections of the country east of the Jordan River, including all of Gilead, Gad, Reuben, and Manasseh. Now, east of the Jordan River is essentially the Transjordan territory, the area that the Israelites had first conquered as they were entering Canaan. So the tribes of Gad, Reuben, and half of the tribe of Manasseh took that territory as their inheritance. And now King Hazael has captured all that. He conquered the area from the town of Aurora by the Arnon Gorge to as far north as Gilead and Bashan. The rest of the events in Jehu's reign, everything he did and all his achievements, are recorded in the book of the history of the kings of Israel. When Jehu died, he was buried in Samaria. Then his son Jehoahaz became the next king. In all, Jehu reigned over Israel from Samaria for 28 years. Now, I put a question in the subtitle of tonight's stream. I asked, can you do God's work using Satan's methods? The authors of this narrative seem convinced that Jehu did a good thing when he called this festival for Baal and used it to kill all the worshipers and prophets of Baal in the land. And it says, they said, well, he destroyed every trace of Baal worship from Israel. Well, it didn't last long. And the question I put there is, can you do God's work using Satan's methods? Murdering people is Satan's way of going about things.
Let me ask you something.
All right?
I can't remember her name, but there was a woman that hid Israelite spies. She was an innkeeper.
You're thinking of Rahab.
Yes. She lied.
She did.
Yeah.
And your point is?
Lying is Satan's method.
Yes.
Did she do God's work?
Oh, well, did she? I mean,
I'm
she got rewarded as if she had.
Yeah.
And she entered the line of heritage that eventually led to the arrival of Jesus. So God, at least to some extent, seems to have looked with favor on her as a person, if not on her actions.
Well, you know what I think?
What?
I think she acted in the best way she knew how. And God is able to reach us at the level we're functioning.
Right. Her motive was to save the spies, was it not?
Her actions were not godly actions, but he led her, he took her in as a daughter and led her to a better life.
Yeah, probably so. So we have a massive murder here, and yet ultimately the false worship in Israel did not get wiped out, as this author seems to think. And so did it really do anything other than kill a whole lot of people? And this probably was written to some extent after the fact, after Jehu had 4 generations sit on the throne in his dynasty, which is, by the way, the most lengthy dynasty in all of Israel's history. You know, the northern kingdom's history. But so they put it that way because, well, no, that's what they think. He had 4 generations. God must have done it. What reason would he have for doing it? Then he got rid of the worship of Baal. Well, you know, a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. So you use force and coercion and murder and these things, trying to change the state of the world. It doesn't work. Anyway, we're ready to move on to the next chapter. When Athalia, the mother of King Ahaziah of Judah, learned that her son was dead, she began to destroy the rest of the royal family. Now, Athalia, we'll read this, but I'm going to go ahead and tell you this. Athalia was one of Jezebel's daughters. So she was a daughter of King Ahab, and Jehoshaphat, king of Israel, had made an alliance with Ahab, and part of that alliance was that he wed his son, who would become king, to this daughter of Ahab, Athalia. And then Athalia and Jehoshaphat's son had a son they named Ahaziah, who became king when Athaliah's husband died. So now Athalia is queen mother in Judah, and now her son has been murdered by the man who now becomes the king of the northern kingdom, and she sees an opportunity to seize power all to herself. So when she saw that her son was dead, she began to destroy the rest of the royal family. But Ahaziah's sister, Jehosheba, the daughter of King Jehoram, or in other words, one of Ahaziah's sisters, took Ahaziah's infant son, Joash, and stole him away from among the rest of the king's children who were about to be killed. She put Joash and his nurse in a bedroom, and they hid him from Athaliah, so the child was not murdered. Joash remained hidden in the temple of the Lord for 6 years, while Athaliah ruled over the land. Now, you might wonder, why in the temple of the Lord? Well, there's a fact that we're not given here in 2 Kings, but that we are given in Chronicles, probably 2 Chronicles somewhere, because I looked it up this week, or last week actually, that there it tells us that this Jehosheba was not just Ahaziah's sister or half-sister, King Jehoram's daughter, but she was also the wife of the high priest. And as the wife of the high priest, then, she had some influence with her husband, and so when she saved this infant from Athaliah, she rushed him over to the temple where her husband could see to it that he was hidden from the queen mother until, well, let's read on and find out. In the 7th year of Athaliah's reign, Jehoiada the priest summoned the commanders, the Kerite mercenaries, and the palace guards to come to the temple of the Lord. He made a solemn pact with them and made them swear an oath of loyalty there in the Lord's temple. Then he showed them the king's son, who's now 6 or 7 years old. Jehoiada told them, "This is what you must do. A third of you who are on duty on the Sabbath are to guard the royal palace itself. Another third of you are to stand guard at the Sur gate. And the final third must stand guard behind the palace guard. These three groups will all guard the palace. The other two units who are off duty on the Sabbath must stand guard for the king at the Lord's temple. Form a bodyguard around the king and keep your weapons in hand. Kill anyone who tries to break through. Stay with the king wherever he goes. So the commanders did everything as Jehoiada the priest ordered. The commanders took charge of the men reporting for duty that Sabbath, as well as those who were going off duty. They brought them all to Jehoiada the priest, and he supplied them with the spears and small shields that had once belonged to King David and were stored in the temple of the Lord. The palace guards stationed themselves around the king with their weapons ready. They formed a line from the south side of the temple around to the north side and all around the altar. Then Jehoiada brought out Joash, the king's son, placed the crown on his head, and presented him with a copy of God's laws. There's a footnote there. We'll read that in a moment. They anointed him and proclaimed him king, and everyone clapped their hands and shouted, "Long live the king!" Let's scroll down. Footnote A says, the Hebrew says Joram, a variant spelling of Jehoram. And I think I talked about this before, that this was a, the two probably had the same name. And we just say Jehoram for Judah and Joram for Israel as a convenience to know which one we're talking about. And then the copy of the covenant. Now that's interesting because we pointed out earlier that in the books of Moses it said that the king should prepare himself a copy of that book. Ideally, he would write it out with his own hand so that he would be very familiar with the contents of it as he prepared to rule the people. And so Jehoiada, in keeping with that part of the law of Moses, presented Joash, when he's 7 years old, with a copy of the covenant or of God's laws. Now, when Athalia heard the noise made by the palace guards and the people, she hurried to the Lord's temple to see what was happening. When she arrived, she saw the newly crowned king standing in his place of authority by the pillars of the temple, Jachin and Boaz, as was the custom at times of coronation. The commanders and trumpeters were surrounding him, and people from all over the land were rejoicing and blowing trumpets. When Athalia saw this, she tore her clothes in despair and shouted, "Treason! Treason!" Then Jehoiada the priest ordered the commanders who were in charge of the troops, "Take her to the soldiers in front of the temple and kill anyone who tries to rescue her." For the priest had said she must not be killed in the temple of the Lord. So they seized her and led her out to the gate where horses enter the palace grounds, and she was killed there. So possibly the darkest point, at least up till this point in the history of Judah, was this 6 years when this daughter of Ahab ruled the nation as queen mother without a king in place, and it seems she hoped to start her own dynasty because she killed the rest of the royal family. And had she succeeded, this would have ended the reign of the dynasty of David, because Ahaziah was a descendant of David, and Ahaziah's son Joash here, also a descendant of David. So the line would have died out had she succeeded. But she didn't succeed, and so the line survived through Joash, who becomes king, technically, at age 7. Well, of course, at age 7, he's not really prepared to be king. So he will have advisors to do the work for him until he's old enough to do it on his own. Reading on, then Jehoiada made a covenant between the Lord and the king and the people, that they would be the Lord's people. He also made a covenant between the king and the people. And all the people of the land went over to the temple of Baal and tore it down. They demolished the altars and smashed the idols to pieces. And they killed Matan, the priest of Baal, in front of the altars. Jehoiada the priest stationed guards at the temple of the Lord. Then the commanders, the Karaite mercenaries, the palace guards, and all the people of the land escorted the king from the temple of the Lord. They went through the gate of the guards and into the palace, and the king took his seat on the royal throne. So all the people of the land rejoiced, and the city was peaceful, because Athalia had been killed at the king's palace. And then this little short footnote, Joash was 7 years old when he became king. Now, one of those footnotes, D, tells us that in the Hebrew text, that part is linked with chapter 12 instead of chapter 11. As I say, the Hebrew numbering versus the numbering in our English Bibles really doesn't make much difference, because it was all done after the fact. It wasn't done when the Bible was written, so we shouldn't assign any significance to it. And then the Hebrew is Jehoash, a variant spelling of Joash. And that's done in almost all English Bibles, using the name Joash instead of Jehoash. Reading on then, Joash began to rule over Judah in the 7th year of King Jehu's reign in Israel. He reigned in Jerusalem 40 years. His mother was Zibiah from Beersheba, which means she was now queen mother. All his life Joash did what was pleasing in the Lord's sight, because Jehoiada the priest instructed him. Yet even so, he did not destroy the pagan shrines, and the people still offered sacrifices and burned incense there. One day King Joash said to the priests, "Collect all the money brought as a sacred offering to the Lord's temple, whether it is a regular assessment, a payment of vows, or a voluntary gift. Let the priests take some of that money to pay for whatever repairs are needed at the temple." But by the 23rd year of Joash's reign, 23rd, he's now 30, the priests still had not repaired the temple. So King Joash called for Jehoiada and the other priests and asked them, "Why haven't you repaired the temple? Don't use any more money for your own needs. From now on, it must all be spent on temple repairs." So the priests agreed not to accept any more money from the people, and they also agreed to let others take responsibility for repairing the temple. Then Jehoiada the priest bored a hole in the lid of a large chest and set it on the right-hand side of the altar at the entrance to the temple of the Lord. The priest guarding the entrance put all of the people's contributions into the chest. Whenever the chest became full, the court secretary and the high priest counted the money that had been brought to the Lord's temple and put it into bags. Then they gave the money to the construction supervisors, who used it to pay the people working on the Lord's temple: the carpenters, the builders, the masons, and the stone cutters. They also used the money to buy the timber and the finished stone needed for repairing the Lord's temple, and they paid any other expenses related to the temple's restoration. The money brought to the temple was not used for making silver bowls, lamp snuffers, basins, trumpets, or other articles of gold or silver for the temple of the Lord. It was paid to the workmen who used it for the temple repairs. No accounting of this money was required from the construction supervisors, because they were honest and trustworthy men. However, the money that was contributed for guilt offerings and sin offerings was not brought into the Lord's temple. It was given to the priests for their own use. Interesting set of details here. The point is that the king had to take action because the priests, for whatever reason, were not seeing to repairing the temple, and the king wanted it done. So he kind of took over and said, okay, here's what you can use for yourselves. Everything else needs to go to repairing the temple. And it did. About this time, King Hazael of Aram went to war against Gath and captured it. Then he turned to attack Jerusalem. King Joash collected all the sacred objects that Jehoshaphat, Jehoram, and Ahaziah, the previous kings of Judah, had dedicated, along with what he himself had dedicated. He sent them all to Hazael, along with all the gold and the treasuries of the Lord's temple and the royal palace. So Hazael called off his attack on Jerusalem. Essentially, buy off your attacker so you won't attack. Well, this will happen multiple times in the accounts as we continue reading. The rest of the events in Joash's reign and everything he did are recorded in the book of the history of the kings of Judah. Joash's officers plotted against him and assassinated him at Beth Millo on the road to Siloam. The assassins were Jozachar, son of Shimeath, and Jehozabad, son of Shomer, both trusted advisors. Joash was buried with his ancestors in the city of David. Then his son Amaziah became the next king. Now, in general, because of the work he did to repair the temple, we see Joash as a good king of Judah. But apparently it wasn't all good, and it's not given to us here why these officers plotted against him, but they may have believed that he was up to no good. So they killed him and let his son take his place, Amaziah. Amaziah has another name, and I don't know. Let me go back and see. I don't think they footnoted that. No, they didn't. But we will find out that he has another name besides Amaziah that is used for him, and it becomes important as we get into the prophets. Now we go back to Israel, the northern kingdom. Jehoahaz, son of Jehu, began to rule over Israel in the 23rd year of King Joash's reign in Judah. He reigned in Samaria 17 years. But he did what was evil in the Lord's sight. He followed the example of Jeroboam son of Nebat, continuing the sins that Jeroboam had led Israel to commit. So the Lord was very angry with Israel, and he allowed King Hazael of Aram and his son Ben-Hadad to defeat them repeatedly. Now recall that King Hazael killed Ben-Hadad, but then he named his son Ben-Hadad. That's interesting, huh? Then Jehoahaz prayed for the Lord's help, and the Lord heard his prayer, for he could see how severely the king of Aram was oppressing Israel. So the Lord provided someone to rescue the Israelites from the tyranny of the Arameans. Then Israel lived in safety again as they had in former days. But they continued to sin, following the evil example of Jeroboam. They also allowed the Asherah pole in Samaria to remain standing. Finally, Jehoahaz's army was reduced to 50 charioteers, 10 chariots, and 10,000 foot soldiers. The king of Aram had killed the others, trampling them like dust under his feet. The rest of the events of Jehoahaz's reign, everything he did, and the extent of his power are recorded in the book of the history of the kings of Israel. When Jehoahaz died, he was buried in Samaria. Then his son Jehoash became the next king. Now, how long does it say he reigned? 17 years. All right. Then his son Jehoash becomes the next king. Jehoash, and there's a footnote there. Hebrew is Joash, a variant spelling of Jehoash. So we've still got similar names between them. Although by this time I think, Joash, I'd have to work it out. I don't remember. I'm not going to try and make a fool of myself and say anything at this point. Anyhow, Jehoash becomes the next king. Joash, son of Jehoahaz, began to rule over Israel in the 37th year of King Joash's reign. Okay, so they did reign together for a short period of time. He reigned in Samaria 16 years, but he did what was evil in the Lord's sight. He refused to turn from the sins that Jeroboam, son of Nebat, had led Israel to commit. The rest of the events in Jehoash's reign and everything he did, including the extent of his power and his war with King Amaziah of Judah, are recorded in the book of the history of the kings of Israel. When Jehoash died, he was buried in Samaria with the kings of Israel. Then his son Jeroboam II became the next king. Now I think that second is added by this version. He is known as Jeroboam II because the first Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, was the first king in the northern kingdom after it split off from Judah. When Elisha was in his, now this is going to be an odd story indeed. I won't even say, I'm going to give you an interpretation, but I won't say it's necessarily right. It's just how I see it. When Elisha was in his last illness, King Jehoash of Israel visited him and wept over him. My father, I see the chariots and charioteers of Israel, he cried. Yeah, that's how Elijah disappeared. And now Jehoash believes that Elisha's about to die, so he uses this phrase, the chariots and charioteers of Israel.
Die?
What?
Did you just say that he believes Elijah is about to die?
I said Elisha is about to die.
Oh, okay.
He's in his last illness, it says here. Elisha told him, get a bow and some arrows. And the king did as he was told. Elisha told him, put your hands on the bow. And Elisha laid his own hands on the king's hand. Then he commanded, open that eastern window. Then he said, shoot. So he shot an arrow. Elisha proclaimed, this is the Lord's arrow, an arrow of victory over Aram, for you will completely conquer the Arameans at Aphek. Then he said, now pick up the other arrows and strike them against the ground. So the king picked them up and struck the ground 3 times. But the man of God was angry with him. You should have struck the ground 5 or 6 times, he exclaimed. Then you would have beaten Aram until it was entirely destroyed. Now you will be victorious only 3 times. Then Elisha died and was buried. Now, this almost sounds like Elisha is advocating for the destruction of Aram militarily. He's telling the king of Israel, do these things. And he's predicting victory over Aram. And then he tells the king to take the remaining arrows and strike the ground with it. And the king does it 3 times. And Elisha gets angry and said, you should have done it 5 or 6 times. Then you would have completely destroyed Aram. As it is now, you'll only defeat them 3 times. It sounds almost like he's advocating for this king to be more aggressive and to totally defeat Aram, which we think would be a misrepresentation of the character of God. And we have argued in the past that Elisha's ministry, we believe, more closely reflects the character of the Creator than did the life and ministry of his predecessor, Elijah. So why is this king saying what he said? Why is he chiding with this king for having only struck the ground 3 times with the remaining arrows? Well, here's the interpretation that I have imagined and that I'm going to put on it. Elisha is not addressing military prowess. He's addressing the king's duty to protect the people that have been assigned as his charge. He's been put in a position of leadership over the nation of Israel. And in that culture, in that time, one of his duties of protection was to defeat the nation's violent enemies. And let's face it, Aram was a violent enemy. So, while not advocating this violence as a godly trait, he is chiding him, I think, for his dedication to his role as protector of the nation of Israel. You haven't shown enough zeal, and by in symbology then, you have not fully dedicated yourself to the task assigned to you as the king of this nation. And then in one of our sermon presentations some time ago, we covered this next story because it's also kind of strange and unusual, and we look at it and we say, what? Groups of Moabite raiders used to invade the land each spring. Once, when some Israelites were burying a man, they spied a band of these raiders. So they hastily threw the corpse into the tomb of Elisha and fled. But as soon as the body touched Elisha's bones, the dead man revived and jumped to his feet. Well, if the dead come to life, there's only one way that can happen. Because there's only one source of life in the universe. Life comes from the Creator. Only the Creator can give life. Which I think is one reason why Satan and those who follow him focus so much on death, because they can't give life. All it can do is kill. So they kill because that's their power. But the Creator can give life. So apparently there was some residual creative power left in Elisha's bones, and the Creator honored that, so that when this corpse was dropped onto Elisha's bones, divine, creative, healing, life-giving power flowed into this corpse, and it came alive again, jumped to his feet. And of course, then I always like to imagine. He comes to life, and he looks, and there's his friends fleeing. How must he have felt about that? Doesn't tell us. That's just something we have to imagine for ourselves. King Hazael of Aram had oppressed Israel during the entire reign of King Jehoahaz, but the Lord was gracious and merciful to the people of Israel, and they were not totally destroyed. He pitied them because of his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and to this day he still has not completely destroyed them or banished them from his presence. This is probably written before the Assyrian captivity. King Hazael of Aram died, and his son Ben-Hadad became the next king. Then Jehoash, son of Jehoahaz, recaptured from Ben-Hadad, son of Hazael, the towns that had been taken from Jehoash's father Jehoahaz. Jehoash defeated Ben-Hadad on 3 occasions, and he recovered the Israelite town. And that's what Elisha had predicted when Jehoahaz came to visit him. Do we have time for another chapter? I think, looking at the clock, we probably do. Amaziah, son of Joash, began to rule over Judah in the 2nd year of the reign of King Jehoash of Israel. And again, the Hebrew there would say a variant spelling. Essentially, this one and Amaziah's father had the same name. So what? Amaziah was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 29 years. 25 and 29, 54. But back in those days, yeah, it was not that terrible of a life expectancy. No. His mother was Jehoaddin from Jerusalem. Amaziah did what was pleasing in the Lord's sight, but not like his ancestor David. Instead, he followed the example of his father Joash. Amaziah did not destroy the pagan shrines, and the people still offered sacrifices and burned incense there. When Amaziah was well established as king, he executed the officials who had assassinated his father. However, he did not kill the children of the assassins, for he obeyed the command of the Lord as written by Moses in the book of the law. Parents must not be put to death for the sins of their children, nor children for the sins of their parents. Those deserving to die must be put to death for their own crimes. Footnote to be, that is a reference to Deuteronomy 24, verse 16. So, like Joash, Amaziah pays at least some attention to the worship of the Creator and to the laws as given to them by Moses. So he kills the assassins, but not their children, which probably, given the intense violence of the culture of the time, was a little bit unusual, and was unusual enough to be noted by these narrators. Amaziah also killed 10,000 Edomites in the Valley of Salt. He also conquered Selah and changed its name to Joktheel, as it is called to this day. One day Amaziah sent messengers with this challenge to Israel's king Jehoash, the son of Jehoahaz and grandson of Jehu. Come and meet me in battle. Or, footnote C, come, let us look one another in the face. Okay. Yeah.
That's kind of funny.
Yeah. Well, humans are really good at hiding their intentions behind flowery language. But King Jehoash of Israel replied to King Amaziah of Judah with this story. Out in the Lebanon mountains, a thistle sent a message to a mighty cedar tree. Give your daughter in marriage to my son. But just then a wild animal of Lebanon came by and stepped on the thistle, crushing it. You have indeed defeated Edom, and you are proud of it, but be content with your victory and stay at home. Why stir up trouble that will only bring disaster on you and the people of Judah? Does King Jehoash sound arrogant here? Calling himself a mighty cedar tree and his cohort in Judah a thistle? But Amaziah refused to listen, so King Jehoash of Israel mobilized his army against King Amaziah of Judah. The two armies drew up their battle lines at Beth-shemesh in Judah. Judah was routed by the army of Israel, and its army scattered and fled for home. King Jehoash of Israel captured Judah's king Amaziah, son of Joash and grandson of Ahaziah, at Beth-shemesh. Then he marched to Jerusalem, where he demolished 600 feet of Jerusalem's wall, from the Ephraim gate to the corner gate. He carried off all the gold and silver and all the articles from the temple of the Lord. He also seized the treasuries from the royal palace, along with hostages, and then returned to Samaria. The rest of the events in Jehoash's reign and everything he did, including the extent of his power and his war with King Amaziah of Judah, are recorded in the book of the history of the kings of Israel. When Jehoash died, he was buried in Samaria with the kings of Israel, and his son Jeroboam II became the next king. King Amaziah of Judah lived for 15 years after the death of King Jehoash of Israel. The rest of the events in Amaziah's reign are recorded in the book of the history of the kings of Judah. There was a conspiracy against Amaziah's life in Jerusalem, and he fled to Lachish. But his enemies sent assassins after him, and they killed him there. They brought his body back to Jerusalem on a horse, and he was buried with his ancestors in the city of David. And all the people of Judah had crowned Amaziah's 16-year-old son, Uzziah, as king in place of his father, Amaziah. After his father's death, Uzziah rebuilt the town of Elath and restored it to Judah. So, I was wrong about Amaziah. Amaziah was father to Uzziah. Uzziah is the one who will become important. Jeroboam II, the son of Jehoash, began to rule over Israel in the 15th year of King Amaziah's reign in Judah. He reigned in Samaria 41 years. He did what was evil in the Lord's sight. He refused to turn from the sins that Jeroboam, son of Nebat, had led Israel to commit. Jeroboam II recovered the territories of Israel between Lebo-Hamath and the Dead Sea, just as the Lord, the God of Israel, had promised through Jonah, son of Amittai, the prophet from Gath-Hepher. Yes, the same Jonah. The book of Jonah doesn't record this, because the book of Jonah just tells the story of his trip to Nineveh, capital of Assyria. Yeah. But here he is, and he had made a prophecy, and Jeroboam II fulfilled that prophecy. For the Lord saw the bitter suffering of everyone in Israel, and that there was no one in Israel, slave or free, to help them. And because the Lord had not said he would blot out the name of Israel completely, he used Jeroboam II, the son of Jehoash, to save them. The rest of the events in the reign of Jeroboam II and everything he did, including the extent of his power, his wars, and how he recovered for Israel both Damascus and Hamath, which had belonged to Judah. Footnote G, or to Yaudi, the meaning of the Hebrew is uncertain, are recorded in the book of the history of the kings of Israel. When Jeroboam II died, he was buried in Samaria with the kings of Israel. Then his son Zechariah became the next king. So we have covered the brief reign of Ahab and Jezebel's daughter Athalia in Judah, and how the high priest and the princess defeated it and managed to save the line of David for posterity through this infant that they rescued and then set up as king when he was 7, Joash. And then we've read the history of further descendants. Jehu put an end to the reign of Ahab and his dynasty, all his descendants, brutally and with a lot of bloodshed, but he did it. He took over, and so we've got Jehu, and I don't know, it was Jehu's son Jehoash, and then Jehoahaz, and then Jeroboam II, and so now we're actually having a 5th king in that dynasty, and that is this son of Jeroboam II, Zechariah. So 4 generations, well, yeah, okay, 4 generations after Jehu, Yeah, that would that would math out, I guess. Anyway, I recently watched a court case in which a tattooer and his wife were suing a former employee for the value of an iPhone. She was working for them. She needed a smartphone for her work, and so they put an iPhone on their cellular plan, and they expected her to make the payments on the phone and for her part of the plan. But she only worked for them for a short time, and she ended up working for a competitor. And then she traded in the iPhone for a lesser phone so she could get off their bill. There was a lot of negativity and cross accusations going on. And now they're suing her to get the value of the phone because they're having to pay for her iPhone, and she doesn't have it. She can't return it. Round and round it goes. And the judge tried to figure it out, and I personally don't think the judge figured it out right, but I haven't sat down and drawn everything out and said what money went where. But the judge didn't really do that either. I think the judge was confused. The employee was definitely confused. She had no clue about the math. And the plaintiffs, the tattooer and his wife who were suing for this money, had a hard time finding information on their bills. The judge had to show them where to find it. Oh, well, do you have a bill you didn't send me that has this information that I did? They eventually find it and they gave it to her, but at any rate, the judge did award them the remainder of what was owed on the iPhone at the time that the woman quit paying on it, plus whatever money she got back when she traded in the iPhone to get they got her an iPhone 16, which was the latest and greatest at the time, I believe. I don't know if there's a 17 out yet or not, but she downgraded to an iPhone 13 so that she could then pay for the transfer of service and the phone that she was getting, the iPhone 13. She used what she got back from the iPhone 16 to pay for the iPhone 13. Like I say, the person who posted it said the math ain't mathin'. Well, I don't think the mathed even when the judge got done with it, but it was too confusing and there was too much information that even the judge didn't ask for, that didn't come out, that you really needed to look at in order to tell for sure how much this woman owed her former employers. So, and I don't know why I got off on that. We're supposed to be ending this. I'm going to stop here at the end of chapter 14, 2 Kings 14, so we can pick up next week with 2 Kings 15. As we said earlier, and again, I'll just remind you, we do have a sermon presentation prepared. Our plan is to stream it live tomorrow at 11 Central Time, so you can join us for that. And until next week, we say goodbye and God bless.
Night, everyone.